Hey, it's Matthew Todd and welcome to Module 4. We've covered a lot of content in the past few weeks. We've talked about the basics, the foundations and mechanics of TDD. We then went on to talk about the strategy of testing for purpose, how we can take an approach where we make each test purely responsible for verifying a very specific single piece of behaviour. We saw how this will lead to very small specific tests, which are therefore simple to create, which will then become easier to maintain. And we saw this in the last module, where we saw an example of refactoring. We saw how refactoring a system with these kind of tests in place can be performed safely, easily and quickly, where we don't have to worry about large numbers of test issues and tests to unpick. When refactoring, the behaviour-focused approach means that we can simply migrate tests alongside the changes to our units. This is in contrast to many systems I see where refactoring becomes a messy job, partly due to brittle complex tests that are actually verifying many pieces of behaviour, which make both understanding the system as well as making the tests pass and ending up with the right set of tests very, very difficult. So in this module, I want to take a step back from the way we're writing our tests and performing TDD to look at the different types of tests we could have in a system, how that relates to TDD, and also talk about how to define a clear test strategy, so that when it comes to testing your application, every developer will have clear information on exactly how this should be done in a way that doesn't produce duplicated or wasted effort. So in this module, I want to start this by talking about some of the reasons TDD can be hard. I think that TDD can be hard, sometimes intimidating or frustrating. I think that TDD is hard because it brings together a number of different development practices. It obviously involves a degree of programming competency, familiarity with the language used in the application code being tested, as well as the test code itself, in addition to standard system libraries, any third-party libraries, frameworks that you might be using. And we also talked about design in the first module, where I said that I don't believe in one of the commonly touted benefits of TDD, whereby many people will say that TDD allows the application design to emerge, like some new discovery or sunken treasure. But I do believe that TDD and unit tests in general do have a role in the validation of design. If we do follow the strategy of testing for purpose, so that each of our tests is responsible for verifying a single piece of behaviour, then the size and complexity of these test methods is going to be a direct mirror of the complexity of our application. There are some exceptions to this, for example if the test code is using test doubles incorrectly, but we'll cover that and other more advanced topics in the next and final module. So, if following testing for purpose you still find yourself with long test methods, then this is going to be a reflection of the complexity of your application, and therefore a sign that you might want to look at performing some refactoring work in the way we described in the last module. In addition to requiring language, library, framework familiarity, and an understanding of your application design, I think TDD can be hard because it forces you to think in detail about all of these things up front. So in order to write a test that verifies a single piece of behaviour, you have to have a crystal clear view on exactly what this piece of behaviour means, what its required input is, what the minimal set of input looks like, and exactly how this behaviour should then manifest itself. If you're performing test planning, as mentioned when we talked about TDD experience profiles, then you'll be verifying your understanding of the feature in detail at the time you're planning these tests, and then dealing with the more technical side of things when it comes to fleshing out the implementation of each test. So TDD and testing for purpose forces you to recognise many potential unknowns up front. It doesn't really give you anywhere to hide away from this, because in order to create the test, you have to code against that knowledge. Now I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I think this is a very good thing, to think carefully about how a feature can be broken down, to think about the design and other aspects we've mentioned. I think to write good quality software, it's good to be in a position where you're forced to recognise what you do and do not know about your implementation early on, so you can address any kind of design questions, requirement questions up front. I think rather than this being hard, perhaps it can make some developers uncomfortable, having to acknowledge what they don't yet know. The good news though is that if we do follow testing for purpose, I believe it does make it easier because it gives a consistency to your tests, and it makes each piece of distinct application behaviour evident. I also want to go beyond that in the next lessons in this module, where I'll talk about test levels, different types of tests, and how to make this decision-making process easier, so that when it does come to thinking about how to test a more complex system, we can have some tools to help us with those decisions. So I'll leave it there for now, and look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.